Before we start, if you're enjoying these conversations, please make sure that you like or subscribe to Cleaning Up. It really helps other people to find us. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation. Hello, I'm Michael Liebreich and this is Cleaning Up. My guest today is Francesco La Camera. He is an economist, he is a diplomat, and he's the Director General of IRENA. That's the International Renewable Energy Agency. Please join me in welcoming Francesco La Camera to Cleaning Up. So Francesco, welcome to Cleaning Up.
Thanks for having me.
So where are you at the moment? It looks like you must be in Abu Dhabi in the office. Is that correct?
Correct. This is exactly my office.
Very good and very impressive it is. You've got some nice flags there. Of course, the last time we met was during COP26.
That's so that I was trying to put in focus. Yes, absolutely, sure.
That's right. So we met at the Climate Action Solution Center, which I helped to set up, and I initiated this marvelous project. Basically, involved renting a castle and having some fantastic discussions. And we met during a discussion on hydrogen, as I recall. That was our last meeting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So let's do the following. The audience for Cleaning Up is very varied. A lot of them know an enormous amount about the topics, but not all of them. There's quite a few people who dip in. They're all concerned about the transition and about climate. But you might give a little bit of a background. What is IRENA?
So IRENA is an intergovernmental entity. So it's an agency that's having now 167 members countries. So it's a really global organization. We have almost other 20 countries in accession. So more or less the same membership of the UN. So we are the only intergovernmental entity that is global, dealing with energy, and naturally focusing on the energy transition based on renewables. IRENA was established 10 years ago, and the first focus was to make the case for renewables, going deep in the knowledge-based product, making clear how renewables could be competitive. So our flagship report on costs, how the energy transition based on renewables can be good for economic and social reasons. So our publication, the socioeconomic impacts, the job reports. Then last year we published together with the International Labour Organization. So supporting country in their planning. Just to give a number, in the way to the COP26, we have supported 72 countries in preparing their indices. So we have, and then we also started to work on scenario after Paris with our global energy transformation. And then we moved first to Renewable Outlook that we published 2 years ago. Then we went to the Energy Transition Outlook. The first edition was in 2021. And the second has been published on the occasion of the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue at the end of March. And what is important that in this scenario, to be clear, we are not making forecasts. We produce scenario. So what we do is working on the technologies, on the policies needed, on the socioeconomic impacts to get to certain results. And naturally, the guide for us are the Paris Agreement goals, so the 1.5. And this is more or less our work. And now we are also trying to make a practical use, if we can use the word practical, of our knowledge base, our support in the planning for moving more into the ground, and also facilitating the matching between project and funding through two initiatives. One is the Climate Investment Platform, that we have launched together with UNDP, Sea for All, in collaboration with the Green Climate Fund. And now with a new facility, the Energy Transition Accelerating Financing, so ETAF, that is an umbrella where always we have been seeing the UAE committing $400 million through the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, but we are also finalizing agreements with other entities. So we really hope that this umbrella may leverage 1 billion, more than 1 billion per year. So this is our goal. So this just in a nutshell, but naturally, if you want to go deep, I will be happy to answer to your question on what we are doing and others.
Right, and there's a fantastic rabbit hole I would love to dive into, which is the difference between a forecast and a scenario. But I'm really going to control myself. You know me. I love to go after the fun stuff. But let's finish the in a nutshell description. How many people have you got? You talked about doing helping 72 countries with their NDCs. This is the nationally determined contributions, essentially their overarching climate action plans. So you helped 72 countries. I mean, you must have thousands of people, that surely means.
Millions. Exactly. First of all, we have been supported by the NDC partnership that provide also with some funds. On this, we have been working with the UNDP under their climate promise. So we have two big allies in our work. We have 140 staff here in Abu Dhabi. We have 70, 80 in Bonn, in our office on research and development. And then we have a small office in New York because we are observer to the UN. And also we have a group of consultants that are working with us. But naturally the consultants are in some way embedded in the work of the agency. So we privilege the relationship with the member state. This is just to say, because, in supporting the country in presenting the NDCs, we have not doing the work of that the consultants usually do. We have been really working together with the country so they can really feel the ownership of what they have proposing to Glasgow. Because in my assessment, at the time I was working for a government, the Italian government, that the rush for Paris was perfectly good because many countries presented the NDCs, but many of them was just the work of consultants. So they remains in papers. The country never really owned the planning, and this is the reason we have been possibly not so ambitious as we could be in the implementation.
Okay, so as a thumbnail, if you take the Bonn Center, the New York and the Abu Dhabi activities, and the average number of consultants, are we talking about 300 or 400 people at any one time that come under your umbrella? Is that right?
I think that's a more correct number. Could be something between 230, 250.
Right, 230, 250. Okay, very good. And now, if we just go back in time to the founding, this was before you were Secretary General. So you came in after Adnan Amin. There had been a temporary Secretary General, Hélène Pelos, to start with. But if I could take you back in time, because I'm familiar with some of what was going on around the time of the founding of IRENA, what was really the kind of core reason to create it? And maybe it's the same as your mandate today, but maybe it isn't. But if you could speak to that, please.
First, you have to ask to the founders more than me, but as far as I can understand, was to build a new narrative, making clear how we had to move for a clean energy system. I think also the Copenhagen COP, that was, I think, 2009, that was not going very well. And there was still work on energy that was very much focusing on oil and gas. So there was no really an institutions, an entity that was promoting and sending, write down the right narrative for renewables. So the organization, in my point of view, and the country that has been supportive and pushed for it, was to create an entity can build a narrative for a new clean energy system based on renewables. So in some way, try to start to abandon the old centralized system based on fossil fuel in favor of a new decentralized system based on renewables. I think that was the move. So give another voice, an important voice, to the transition to a clean energy system.
Yes, and I think, as I say, from my perspective as a close spectator around that time, some part of it was frustration at the time that the IEA was really not focusing on the renewable energies. That is a period where the IEA was suggesting they would become, less than 1% of electricity kind of forever because they were so expensive, not keeping up with the cost trends. And I was one of the very vocal people saying, this is totally ridiculous. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you say renewables will never be anything, then which sensible politician or entrepreneur or financier or corporation would really put a lot of weight behind renewables? And so there was a lot of frustration at the time with the IEA, which of course today is singing a very different song. So, has the original need for IRENA grown or been reduced since then?
I think that naturally the agency has been able to make the case for renewables. And so the confidence on our data, on our report, I think is transforming the sense of going for the renewable into a new culture that now is culture that everyone is trying to work on it. So naturally, we have been working and say very clearly that the new energy system was going to be based largely on renewable, so dominated by renewables and complemented by hydrogen, mainly green, and sustainable by biomass, by energy. So we have been the first in saying that. So we are happy that others are finally joining on this. But in the same time, we are the one that have developed the methodologies, the models, the instruments for going from the narrative to the concrete life. So offering concrete solution, concrete option to our membership. It's not by chance that we have been the agency entrusted by the Africa to work on their continental plan. So why? Because we have models and instrument that's been tailored to manage the energy transition and modeling the reality in a way that is closer to the reality itself. So we have been now able to work on planning. Our world energy transition outlook is going to move to regional energy transition outlook and some kind of domestic energy transition outlook for the very big country that may look like a continent. And this has been recognized and supported by the European Commission and other. So I think that naturally now there is a more common understanding on what could be the future energy system. But I think that the reason of having IRENA is increasing every day because we are now in the best position, in my point of view, to offer concrete solutions for the acceleration of the energy transition.
Thank you for that, and I certainly agree that you've got a distinctive voice. some great capabilities. And I personally think that it's wonderful when more groups sort of compete with for their vision, and some are better at modeling one part and some better at another, but you do get this kind of knowledge emerges as a result of that. I do have to pick you up on one thing though. When you said we were the first to see the potential of the renewable-based system and the first to model it, of course, there was also this little company until 2009 called New Energy Finance, which was going from 2004 in many ways on the same thesis. I mean, our thesis was it's a complete transformation of the energy system based on clean energy, that it will require policy, but that it will also require vast amounts of private finance. But we were working on the transformation all along. And I remember also lots of discussions we had about how much information should we share with IRENA, who would then repackage it and give it away to your increasing numbers of members. It was quite a live debate in our sales team.
So let's put in the way that we are being the first one in intergovernmental organization that set clearly the pathway for that. And what is important in my point of view, that when we come with something, it's something that reflects the complexity of our membership. So it's something that embraces everyone in our messages. So I think it's also a very, very relevant.
I agree, and I think to me that's sort of forgotten in the name International Renewable Energy Agency. The focus is always on that it's renewables and so on, not on the fact that you have 167 members, which by the way is much more than the IEA, and that you speak to governments and far more governments at a very different level to a company which, you know, just for clarity, I'm not an executive at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, although I write for them, but that's a fantastic information provider, but doesn't speak to the same constituents that you do.
That's correct. This is the effect that is the answer to your question. At this moment, we are the only one that have direct access to 167 Ministry of Energy or Foreign Affairs in 167 countries, and also in our accession country. So that's this a unique capacity. So for also new items that are relevant for the energy transition, like the mineral, the critical mineral, the rare earths, when we talk about green hydrogen standard and other, the fact that the agency is global pose IRENA in the best position to work on this aspect, because it's covering all the different interests and everyone can contribute to our work. We have launched this way to work that we call collaborative framework for all the areas that are relevant for the energy transition. We are governments, stakeholders, private sector, private companies can come and be part of the discussion. This is really a unique way to deal with all these topics. Let people sharing experience, set working group, go in deep, have the possibility to read in advance our report, contributing to it. One, for example, that I'm very proud of it, when we have been working for, it was the first time, where we are working for a paper for the G20, Italian G20 on offshore wind. And we have given the paper to our collaborative framework, so to all our membership to comment. So we have been able in some way to produce something for the G20, taking into account the opinion and the suggestions coming from our membership. And this is, I think, is absolutely unique.
Thank you. And let's push on the renewable energy part of your name, because you also have a lot of activities, core activities, separate from these big integrative reports that we'll get onto. But you've got core activities also around energy efficiency, have you not? And I think there was a collaboration with Denmark at one point. I don't know if that's still in place, but talk us through why is it called renewable energy, but then you actually also do energy efficiency, and kind of how do you square that circle?
You know, if you look to our General Assembly, so clearly our membership refers to us not as the energy transition, as the renewable energy agency, but they refer to us to the agency that is dealing with the energy transition. But names are also a brand and also very difficult to change. So changing the IRENA in making energy transition agency, I think is in some way no worth. But if you look to our work plan, what the member state asked us to do, we are dealing with the energy transition, and the member state also asked for establishing this high-level forum on energy transition that we can convene in every year. Naturally, first year we have a very, limited edition of this high-level forum because it was going to be virtual, and but now hopefully if the pandemic will ease as it's doing, at least here in the UAE. I don't want to say that because it's always a little bit hesitant, but we are quite good here. We can have a meeting in person now. The organization, the country, the logistic, they are very good. So they are really supportive on this aspect. So we can start to have a meeting in person, hopefully. And then we can have use of this high-level forum on energy transition that has been in some way asked to be established by the membership to make clear that the agency is working on all the area of the transition.
Okay, but now we are going to, I don't know, maybe get controversial, maybe not, because nuclear, if I look at those big integrative reports, which summarize, presumably, although they're only scenarios, not forecasts, but they do summarize, presumably, your view on the transition, and they don't include nuclear. So you've got hydrogen is in there, energy efficiency, renewable energy, electrification of transportation, and so on. But the one thing, and carbon capture and storage is in there, carbon removal is in there, but not nuclear. I mean, does that respect what you're saying? That this is the transition, but why be blind to nuclear?
Oh, nuclear is there. It's 2% in 2050.
I'm looking.
You are firstly looking to this graph.
Yes,
it's not there because it was just 2%. But if you go a little bit to the more detail, there is a 2% of nuclear.
Okay, so let's move on to the World Energy Transition Outlook, because you're absolutely right that I've pulled a chart from that to make my baseless, as it turns out, accusation of ignoring nuclear. But that is a chart, as you say, from the World Energy Transition Outlook.
Yep. I don't feel that as an accusation.
No, but let's come back to the 2%. Let's talk about the transition outlook, and because that's really, you could use that as a way of describing how you think the transition would need to play out to get to the 1.5 degrees, and you very much focus on 2030, do you not, in that report? Right,
you are completely right, and there is the reason is very simple. Because now everyone agree that if we don't show results before 2030, we can forget the 1.5 and even the 2 degrees. Is what we say very clearly in our last World Energy Transition Outlook. So we say very clearly we are not on track with where we should be. To achieve the Paris Agreement goals. And we say if we don't change dramatically, our way to produce and consume energy, the 1.5 is very close to vanish, and even the 2 degrees. And I should say that we have been very courageous to come with that, but we based our assessment just on numbers. We couldn't make our hopes obscure the numbers. The numbers are there, they're easy to read. And just a few weeks after our report, also the IPCC came with similar conclusion. So just to give you an example on the numbers. So renewable installed capacity is breaking records year after year. In the last 2 years, we installed for each year 260 gigawatts. This means making 4 are for renewable and 1 are for the old generation capacity. So it's clear where we are going. But the fact is that if you want to get the reduction in CO2 emission that we need in 2030, we have this number to be 3 times more. So we need to go to 800 gigawatt installed each year from now to 2030. If we want to have hopes to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway, these are numbers, it's not opinion, no? So we're trying to make this message very, very strong. It has been received, but we have to see how this will unfold. But naturally, the situation from our point of view require a dramatic efforts.
Francesco, let me push you on that though. As we speak, wind and solar have had this extraordinary 2 decades, and I've been privileged to be an analyst over the last couple of decades, watching them go from a standing start, enormous investment, enormous policy support, enormous societal support, and they currently deliver something around 13, 14% of global electricity. Incredible from a standing start. But since electricity is only 20% of society's energy needs, that means that really wind and solar are only at 3%, meeting 3% of energy needs of society after these 2 decades. So your transition outlook says that renewables are going to do 25% of the work. Is that realistic? I mean, should we at some point admit that for all that we would like that to happen, we love renewables, you and me both, the world, but it's not going to happen?
I checked the numbers when you were speaking. So as far as our numbers says, and our numbers are the numbers, we can say that the share of renewables in electricity generation in the recent years has been 26%.
Okay, but that includes large-scale hydro, of course, which is not growing almost at all.
We like always to talk about the renewables as an holistic system. No? And in our scenario, it's supposed to go to be 90% of the electricity generation in 2050. And the share of renewables in final energy consumption today is around 16%, and will be 79%, so 80% in 2050. This is our numbers. Naturally, the demand is the correct one. If it's realistic to get into this path. Naturally, this is what we need to do. And we launched an alarm in our last World Energy Transition Outlook that we are really risking to lose the 1.5 perspective shortly, or even the 2 degrees perspective, if we don't change dramatically the way we produce and consume energy. That's where we are. And we think that it's still possible. The numbers show that renewables has been breaking records year after years, but not yet at the speed that is needed. So we have to balance what the private can do with the investment, because we need the private to go for that. But we also have to be very clear on what the public can do. So surely the public can work on the grids, ensuring flexibility, ensuring interconnectivity, ensure the balancing of the system. This is very important. to have. So the public has to work with that. The public has to work on building a demand for hydrogen and green hydrogen mainly. So they have to finally adapt the legal environment that was fitting in a old system that was a centralized fossil fuel system to a decentralized system based on renewables. This means that also the legal aspect of the market has to be touched and renewed. And also when we talk about the business model have to be changed. So I'm going to speak in a few days on hydropower and green hydrogen. You know, now we are starting, once we are using hydropower for the base load, mainly. Now we are trying to move to a different use of hydropower, trying to work on the peak load, trying to work on feeding hydrogen. But the risk is that losing their base load function can also bring for a less use of the hydropower energy itself. So we have to work for a market that will ensure that the profitability of the hydropower remain. So there are things that has to be changed also in the way we organize and regulate, rule the contracts. So legal environment, business model, grid, all these aspects has to be public. If we all do this, and if we also work on an international cooperation to be more effective on focusing on the things that has to be done, I think that we have to hope that we can go to and reach and achieve the Paris Agreement goals. Naturally, it's very, very difficult. This has not been hide, but I think that's still possible.
Right, and there's a lot that you say there that I endorse entirely. And I think that the system nature of the problem, the fact that you need the flexibility and that hydro will play a role and hydrogen and so on, and also the fact that you need the public sector, so the governments, the regulators have to create the frameworks. But you'll have to forgive me if I just push back once more on this question of the scale of the problem, because you say renewables has been breaking records, and it has, but really only wind and solar that have been consistently, and of course, batteries, but from an incredibly small base relative to the scale of demand of the energy system. The batteries are going to be fabulous for transportation, but they're not going to provide the sort of 2-3 weeks of storage or of ride through for really weather patterns where there isn't wind and solar. So, you know, when I say wind and solar is 3%, and you correctly point out that there's other renewables, hydro in the case of electricity, biofuels, biogas, biomass elsewhere in the system. But, you know, the fact is that society is putting a lot of weight on wind and solar, and the records and the growth is all coming from wind and solar. So I push back once more and ask, you know, is it realistic for, you know, even if you aggregate it up, for renewables as a whole to go from 16%, I think you said, to 78%, when the only bit that's growing that at those speeds is the wind and the solar, and the rest of it really isn't?
We naturally, you may not agree on all our numbers, but our numbers say it is possible, and also making naturally the hydrogen working on complementing the move to renewables, and having also an expansion of the sustainable use of biomass that where we have to be very careful on ensuring the sustainability. But all this have to work together, because naturally, and this also in our conversation where we start to chat, I mentioned how important could be remove possible barrier or difficulties coming from the use of mineral and for the batteries. And I think the batteries are not only to be used for the cars, but they also can be used for the storage. And we have also the hydrogen that can be used for seasonal storage. So we have to put all we have together, and this as the miracle of policies, if they will work, to put all these elements together, because we see that where there are the conditions, the private money is going fastly and efficiently. So we have to be, having as a first point of attention in our work, implementing the commitments as fast as possible. And I hope that in this respect, the COP27 in Egypt could be very important for Africa. It will be the African COP. So we really think that this idea of having a new deal for Africa may come there. And then we will have the COP28 that will put together East and West, South and North together. So we have to take profit of these two elements for abandoning the negotiation mood of the COP and going for the implementation mood, action, action, action. And naturally, again, Michael, we cannot hide behind the curtain. It's very difficult, but it's a race for the human race. So we have to win that race.
Right, and just to be very clear, thank you for that answer. I don't suggest that the numbers don't add up, that the numbers are the wrong numbers. The question is really, when you see these, things have to grow by factors of 3, factors of 5, factors of 7, and so on. And we know how difficult that has been with planning, law, and all sorts of factors holding back. That was only my question was more whether you're optimistic about achieving it, not what it is. I agree. This is a perfectly good set of numbers.
Always, I know. When I wrote a book, one of my book was this conclusion and say I was figuring something to happen and say that if was going to happen, the answer was yes, I hope, but I don't think. In this case, I cannot distinguish between the two.
Right.
And I wish to say that we can do it.
Yeah. My own position, in case anybody out there amongst our audience is listening, is I think we can definitely beat 2 degrees. So in a sense, the Paris Agreement, well below 2 degrees, as long as 1.8 counts as well below, then I'm fairly optimistic. 2 degrees, 1.8, something like that. 1.5, I have to admit that I'm beyond 1.5. I don't see it.
The problem is that there is no 1.8 today.
Right. Oh no, and it doesn't make any difference. Today, it's the same things that you would do to get to 1.8 as 1.5. So it's an academic discussion. But I want to come in, there's a few topics there. We talked a little bit about nuclear, because of course, there'll be lots of people out there who say this is all nonsense because the only way of doing this is nuclear. And I don't know whether you want to comment on that or whether we should just move on, because I don't think either of us really believe
naturally the agency doesn't deal with nuclear. Naturally, but we collect the data and everything. And so on this, our position is very simple. We say that 2030 will say if it would be possible to achieve the Paris Agreement goals or not. The 2030 will give us the answer. So our point is that we have to use what we have from now to 2030 for making the change happen.
Yeah.
So I prefer not to enter in the polemics on other, but if we start today to build a nuclear plant, I was in Finland a few weeks ago, where they've opened, the new nuclear plant they built. It took 12 years, and we are talking about Finland, so a very efficient place, and the cost rose 3 times in 12 years. If you look at the cost of the waste recovery, and if you look to the administrative court in France, they said the costs are out of control. If you look at to the administrative court in the UK, so you must be aware about that, they say that the nuclear is not an option to fighting climate change. So these are all elements together that let us think that probably we don't say we are not any ideological position. So, but for the time being, we have to work on the technologies that we have. There is also an interesting work on the fusion. I don't remember now the distinction between fission and fusion, but so having nuclear without waste. But this may come when we already know if the Paris Agreement. The question is not because it's a nominal win. The problem is to avoid the very heavy costs that may come for not keeping the temperature, the resident temperature, into the Paris Agreement path. Right. So that's the reason for us saying that nuclear will not play a major role in this first half of the century. No. I don't know if this is convincing you.
It absolutely is in line with many of the conversations I have. I think I'm more positive about the need to continue to research, to develop, because if you want it to play a big role in the 2030s, you have to kind of start now. But what you said is very reminiscent of at least one conversation I nearly got into. Literally, I was nearly attacked, I feel, nearly got in a fist fight because there was a nuclear executive on a panel that I chaired who wanted to spend his time on the panel not promoting his solution, one of these innovative new reactors, but he wanted to spend his time trying to persuade the audience that it was stupid to invest in wind, solar, renewables, energy efficiency, or anything else in the interim before he even had a product. And I kind of tried to move him on from that position, and he got very angry with me. But it's the same position as
you know that you have not to be disappointed because if the guy acted this way, that way, I think.
Yeah. So I want to touch, if I might, on hydrogen, and then to talk about some of the current events, because we're having this conversation. So far we've been having it in a slightly theoretical way, and of course, there's what's going on in Ukraine is top of mind. But if we can touch on hydrogen. What role, the short version, do you see it playing between now and 2030? I mean, given your focus on 2030 that rules out nuclear, doesn't it pretty much rule out hydrogen as well?
No, not at all. First of all, because already hydrogen is being traded in this day. So we have already the first ship of blue hydrogen, in this case, moving to East, so to Japan, to India, to other countries. And you must remember that when we have been together and talking about the hydrogen, no? How, and there were also some friends of us that were working on that side, how the cost of hydrogen is getting lower and lower and lower. No? I remember, I make always the case, I hope that the people of Bloomberg will be not offended by this, but I remember that in the summer of 2020, I think Bloomberg came saying that green hydrogen with $2 per kilo was going to be competitive in 2050. Then we came the same year as IRENA, say that was going to be competitive in 2030. And there were the companies represented that we had the pleasure to meet together, where they said, oh, look, it's already competitive now. We are exporting ammonia. In 2025 will be the most competitive way to. So what is important is to create the demand, because now the question is not the competitiveness of hydrogen. The problem is to create the market for hydrogen. So policies has to be there naturally for lowering the cost of electrolyzer. That could be okay, but mainly to create the market. And create the market, so supporting the industries that may move for making the change for having hydrogen as with them. So this kind of policies are very important, as are also very important that coming with standards and certification that can make the market work more efficiently. We as IRENA, we will start to work on that. Naturally, there are many that are working on that. But we think that our global membership may provide for some product coming from us more recognition, more readiness to be accepted, because the trade will be naturally a global network, global trade. We have explained in this report, you can see Geopolitics of Green Hydrogen, how we foreseen that the market will be more regional than the usual fossil fuel markets, because the cost will be always driven by the cost of renewables and transport. So we see that there is a large preference for looking at the market will be more regional. But it can have an impact, and can have an impact already now. So we think that hydrogen could be some of the game changer, having already an impact in 2030.
And your certification scheme, which is very much needed for clean hydrogen, will you also extend that to certify blue hydrogen, so hydrogen from natural gas?
We are open to discuss this. I will be in Barcelona and shortly to discuss green hydrogen, and I will try to make clear that IRENA is ready to work on that. And we will see with our membership. We have a collaborative framework that is there. We already have started to collect all the data that may allow us to do this exercise. And then we will ask the membership how far they want us to go. They already got asked to go for standard and certification, but when we have to go to the final tailoring of our reports, I think that is a good practice that we listen to the our membership.
Although that will get you into a huge discussion about fugitive methane, which will open up a whole new sort of I don't know, ball of wool, kettle of fish, whatever the saying is. The methane discussion is very heated. But I want to come back to your point about we need to create the markets. I mean, look, the problem with this, you know, it's very nice to just a picture of hydrogen, but the fact is there is already a huge market for green hydrogen, right? It's called the market for hydrogen, which is already, it's about $150 billion a year. It is producing hydrogen for fertilizer and for refineries. It is all gray. It is all produced from fossil fuels. And everybody who wants to talk about hydrogen, they want to talk about one subsidized cargo of blue hydrogen that went to Japan for whatever greenwashing reasons. They don't want to talk about decarbonizing the hydrogen demand. I'm playing devil's advocate again, I apologize, but they don't want to talk about decarbonizing existing hydrogen demand. It's always some hydrogen bus or some hydrogen scooter or some hydrogen, boiler or some hydrogen generation, but never decarbonizing current polluting, emitting hydrogen. Why is that?
No, we have to be careful of what we intend for decarbonizing the existing production of hydrogen, because the way to decarbonize the producing of hydrogen is producing by renewables. So so we don't want to leave the open the door on the fact that the traditional green hydrogen, the one produced with fossil fuel, can really be an option. We think that concerning the blue hydrogen, that this could be an option, especially for the country that they are exporting the oil and gas, where they can maintain life in the economy through going from exporting oil and gas. With the gas, with CCS, they can export blue hydrogen. And this could be, anyway, an improvement that in a transition period could be very well received, in my point of view.
Right, but
that's the reason we talk about CCS in our outlook.
But if you want to replace the current grey hydrogen, which is responsible for about 2% of global emissions, if you want to replace that with green hydrogen, just to do some triangulation, some reality checks, that would require every single wind turbine and every single solar panel installed anywhere in the world to date times 1.4. So we're not going to decarbonize the existing hydrogen demand, let alone any new demand. I mean,
to respond to your question, because naturally also this is a good question. We have made our hypothesis in our transition outlook. I think I'm not sure to remember, but the 30% of the electricity production will go for producing hydrogen. So already there, we took into account how much electricity has to go for producing the green hydrogen. So the number that you see are already included the part of electricity that should be used for having hydrogen covering the 16% of total final energy consumption in 2050.
No, and I think it's another one where I'm sure the numbers add up. The question is the scale that's required.
We have to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, and forgive me, like I say, I'm playing the devil's advocate because it's okay. Such a vital question for so many people. So I'm really appreciate that you're giving me this, the best answers that you can on this. And I'm just conscious of time, unless you want to go back to the question of hydrogen and scale. I'm just conscious of time. And I would like to ask the final question about Ukraine and this, ghastly attack, on Ukraine, on one of your members, frankly, by one of your other members, I suspect. Both of them are members of yours, not that that's necessarily relevant. But we have this situation. It looks like at the same time as everything you talked about in your World Energy Transition Outlook, the world is also now trying to get off Russian oil and gas on an accelerated time frame. Now, does that speed up the transition by reinforcing the need to get off oil and gas, or does it slow it down by distracting everybody and forcing them to invest in oil and gas in friendly nations because now it's no longer acceptable to buy it from Russia? So there's more investment going to happen domestically in the US, in Canada, in the UK, and around the world. Are we going to be putting that money into oil and gas and potentially locking ourselves in? So Ukraine conflict, accelerator or decelerator of the transition?
That's a very good question. So naturally, in the short term, it may have an impact and not a positive impact. But immediately after, I think that it could be really an accelerator of the move to the energy transition. So naturally, we have to be very careful on this. Much depend on the policies that governments will put in place. We were saying, for example, talking about the COVID, now we had to spend the money to recover in a way to accelerate the energy transition. The fact is that the money spent for recovering from COVID, less than 2 digits, so no less than 10% went to the energy transition. And we were all agreeing that we had to link the short term to the long term response. Here, I think that the chance that we can go for an acceleration of the transition are more evident. And because government also where there was not a strong climate or environmental approach to the energy transition, now they look also to the side of the energy security, where naturally investing in renewables may provide more independence. This is what we wrote in the report there. So how the hydrogen and renewables can play an important role for having less dependency from other countries. Today, 80% of our countries are net importer of oil and gas, 80%. And naturally, they are dependent. But we have seen this along the years. From when I was studying in the university, that the price of fossil fuel has been already impacting on the way the economies we are working and other. So there is a big, I think, understanding that going for that may ensure to be more resilient on different kind of shocks. So this will be really another adding reason for speed up. So not only the climate aspect, and we also say that it's not only climate because it's also economy. We will have more GDP. It's more social impact. We will have more jobs with the energy transition, but we can have more resilience in the energy system. And this could be another really strength for accelerating the path.
Okay, thank you. So short term, perhaps Ukraine does distract a bit of attention and financial flows, but in the medium and longer term, then you see the two really not just for climate, but for resilience reasons and all these social reasons. You see the two actually acting together.
Yeah, the fact is that more and more people is realizing that going for a new renewable energy system based on renewables and complemented, as we say, by hydrogen and green hydrogen mainly, and sustainable biomass will ensure more resilience and supporting economic growth, employment. So I think now we are all very close to be convinced that that's the way.
Very good. Francesco, it's been an enormous pleasure. You can see exactly, I think the audience will understand exactly why you're the diplomat and I'm not, but I hope that I've helped to air some of the very difficult conversations that we have to have around these topics, around scale and speed and distraction from world events and so on.
Michael, I don't want to upset you, but I am not a diplomat. I am an economist.
Oh, okay, but you did well. You have you worked. I just know that you worked on, on the Aarhus Convention. And
yeah. Oh, that's good.
And so on. So you're a cross-dresser, economics and diplomacy, but above all, a fantastic advocate for renewable energy and the work of IRENA. I look forward to continuing conversations with you. You talked about Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, and of course, COP28, which is in the UAE, where you are right now. And hopefully we will get time to tease out these issues in more and more detail over the next couple of years.
Great pleasure.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very, very much.
Grazie molte. Ciao.
So that was Francesco La Camera, Director General of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. My guest next week on Cleaning Up is Patrick Greichen. He's State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and a former Executive Director of Agora Energiewende, which is a think tank working on the transition to clean energy. Please join me at this time next week for a conversation with Patrick Greichen. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation.